Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about native Kerberos with Azure Active Directory. Now this isn't the Kerberos we've had in the past where Azure AD could understand a Kerberos token given by something else as part of seamless sign-on. This is Azure AD acting as a Kerberos realm and actually giving out tickets. As always, if this is useful, please go ahead and like, subscribe, comment and share and hit that bell icon to get notified of new content. When I think about Azure AD, it's a cloud-based identity provider. So it speaks cloud. We speak things like OpenID Connect. We speak things like auth 2. We speak SAML. We speak WS Fed because they all work very much around the cloud. Now on premises, we're used to the idea of regular Active Directory. A regular Active Directory, well, that speaks Kerberos. That speaks NTLM. And that's great when you have all those various ports open where I have some shared secret between the service I want to talk to and that identity provider. But if I want Kerberos today in Azure, well, either I extend my Active Directory into my virtual network, maybe it's a site-side VPN or ExpressRoute private peering, maybe I actually put DCs up in my virtual network, or I could use things like Azure AD domain services and get that managed set of domain controllers to give me an Active Directory domain services environment, which lets me have things like Kerberos. There are some services, for example, Azure Files, that if I want to do that data plane role-based access control, it integrates with Active Directory. So either I have to tie my storage account into an AD domain services or I use that Azure AD domain services. So that's very much what we've had in the past. But now what's happening is Azure AD, so this is our AAD tenant up here, is going to support Kerberos. And it's doing this by it is going to be its own Kerberos realm. It's actually going to be this Kerberos.microsoftonline.com. So it will actually give out things like that ticket granting ticket. It will give out tickets to access various services. There's no extra configuration I have to perform on my Azure AD tenant. There is no line of sight required to domain controllers to actually leverage this. It's just Azure AD, hey, it's now a Kerberos realm. Now this is in preview, I really want to stress that. So the things I'm going to talk about right now, the implementation details, are likely to change over time. More services will get added over time. But I want to go through the experience as it is right now. Now, we always think about there's different elements involved in Kerberos. So I'm going to come back to that. But the first part is obviously the device that I am on. So the device I am on, well, that device must be Azure AD joined. So I have to have this Azure AD joined. It can be hybrid, so it could be AD joined as well, but that is not required at all. I don't need line of sight to domain controllers. All I have to be is Azure AD joined. In terms of the operating system, this can be Windows 10. Now it needs the latest. I've seen different actual answers for is it the 21H1 or 20H1, but think of it as the new version of Windows 10 with the latest cumulative update. It can be the latest kind of Windows 11 or even Server 2022 if I'm focusing on that interactive authentication. Now, also on the device to use this, there is a policy that I have to turn on to basically say, hey, I want to go and get my cloud tokens. If you actually go and look at a machine for a second, let's jump over here and actually see that, if it's going to wake up. So this is my Windows 11 box running actually up in the cloud. And I've got this navigated over to my local computer policy. administrative templates under computer configuration, system Kerberos, and we have this policy. Allow retrieving the cloud Kerberos ticket during the logon that you have to have enabled. So that's really the only key change I require on the client. That's going to let it actually go and get these tokens from that Azure AD Kerberos realm. I have to be logged on as an Azure AD user as well. Now, once again, I do not need to be AD joined in the environment. There is no requirement for the AD. Now, what you're going to see in my environment is I am not AD joined, but I do have line of sight to domain controllers. So what that means is because of the seamless sign-on experience you get if you're Azure AD joined and have line of sight to domain controllers, well, because what's actually going on behind the scenes is, hey, well, I have my account. Remember, we have Azure AD Connect, and that actually sends information about the AD as well. So what happens is when I go and get my primary refresh token, when I authenticate to Azure AD, it sends me information about the on-prem AD. So if I have line of sight to domain controllers, I actually go and talk to the LSA on my AD, and I will get Kerberos tickets as well. So you might see that when I demo this. I am not AD joined. I do not require that ticket. It's simply a side effect because I do have a line of sight to domain controllers, but I don't need line of sight. I'm not AD joined. This is all utilizing Azure AD. Now, what that's going to mean now is that for the services that support this, when they need Kerberos, I can just use the Azure AD Kerberos service for that. In my demonstration, for example, I'm going to use Azure Files. So what you'll see me actually do here is, hey, I'm going to have a storage account. So I'm using Azure Files. Let's say this is storage account 1. And I'm going to use that as my demonstration. Now today in the preview, this is really designed around, hey, Azure Files hosting FS Logix profiles from Azure Virtual Desktop. They were also in private preview using kind of SQL managed instance, Windows authentication with Azure AD, application proxy using Kerberos. Expect this to grow. Today, I cannot bring my own application to integrate with this Kerberos. So it's a very distinct set of scenarios today. But again, it's in preview, it's just come out. Expect this to grow over time. What I'm going to demo this with is I'm not actually using Azure Virtual Desktop or FX Logic. I am just going to use regular Azure Files, but show how I've joined that to the Kerberos realm of Azure AD, and I'm going to be able to do kind of a net use without passing any credentials. The only requirement here is the account I'm using has been synchronized from my on-prem AD to the Azure AD. So that I've got that account now sits up in the Azure Active Directory. Now, when we think about Kerberos, remember there's 3 heads. The reason it's called Kerberos is you have that 3-headed dog guarding the gates of Hades. Well, there's 3 heads when I think about Kerberos. We have the client that's actually going to go and access some service. We have the service I want to access, in this case, a storage account. And then we actually have the secure token service, the STS, which Azure AD is playing in this. For this to work, they have to be known to the service. So my account, we already talked about, that's been replicated via Azure AD Connect. The machine has to be joined to Azure AD, but the storage account in this instance, or the SQLMI or whatever else, has to have a representation in the Azure AD as well. Now, what this means today for Azure Files is a set of steps you go through, but if this is storage account 1, for example, what will happen is I do an app registration. So I will create an app registration for storage account 1. that represents the storage account. So that's going to enable this to actually work. And we can see this if I jump over for a second. So I created a storage account just called Kerb1. And what you'll notice straight away is when I go to file shares, it's telling you, hey, look, you've configured Azure AD Kerberos Authentication Preview. And it tells you, hey, this is really just designed for Azure Virtual Desktop's FS Logix profiles today. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a regular net use of that. But what we then do is we actually create a new access token. I'll show this. But the key point is in Azure AD, I actually go in and I create an app registration for that storage account. So that becomes the representation in Azure AD of the storage account. Because remember, we need all three parts to work. We need the STS, we need the client, we need the service. So that app registration is the representation of the storage account. Because when we actually do Kerberos, there isn't a direct conversation between the service and the STS, i.e. Azure AD. What happens is me as the client says, hey, I want to go and talk to this service. Give me a token, a ticket that I can use. Well, for this to trust it, there has to be a shared secret between them. So the way this actually works is you create an access key. So let's say I create an access key called Kerb key 1. On the app registration, I set that as the secret. So now there is a shared secret between that Azure AD. So when it gets a token, hey, only me and the STS know that, I'm going to trust it, and that's going to make this actually work. In terms of the ports used for the communications, well, it's actually using the Kerberos proxies. This is over HTTPS, so it's just 443. So it's going to work over the internet. There's no security or port problems you're going to see actually with this happening. So let's look at a little bit more detail around this. Again, this is a scenario. There are many others. This is just the one I'm kind of using in this example. So for the storage account example, there's a set of steps you go through. There's quite a few of them. But what it really boils down to is I'm going to end up creating that app registration to represent the storage account. I create a new access key on the storage account that I'm going to configure as kind of a password on the app registration. So now I have that shared secret between them. Once again, today there's quite a lot of steps. I would expect as this moves to GA for the various services, you'll see that actual experience change. So I showed that storage account already. There are some additional things you have to do. For example, on the app registration itself, there are some API permissions you have to go and consent to. Things like the OpenID, sign users in, view users basic profile, sign in and read the user profile. On the storage account itself, there's a whole set of steps. So this is all the various steps I performed. And this is all outlined in the Microsoft Docs. If you follow the Microsoft Doc exactly step by step, it works. If you deviate, it doesn't work. But if I go and look, this is the details of the Active Directory properties from my storage account. And you can see it's configured, hey, these domain names, forest names, domain GUIDs, Azure Storage SID. It has all of these properties. So it is configured for Active Directory based authentication. But as we saw in that portal, it's using Azure AD for this. So that's the configuration that we're actually going to do. Now don't forget also, you still need the permissions on the storage account. So at the data plane level, actually didn't need to go there. Remember in the access control, I still need the role assignment to actually be allowed to connect. So here you can see I've got that storage file data SMB share elevated contributor, and I've given it to my user. Once again, I'm showing the storage account for SQL MI, for app proxy, the exact details will vary. But let's see this in action. So what I have over here is I just have a regular terminal up and running. And if I dump out my tickets, you can see I've got a bunch of different tickets right now. Now you will notice when we look at this, I have that ticket I talked about. This machine is not AD joined, but you'll see I do have a ticket from my regular Active Directory because it's Azure AD joined. Azure AD Connect sent it information, i.e. to Azure AD about my AD. So when I get the primary refresh token from Azure AD when I authenticate, it gives me the detail about the on-prem AD as well. And then I go and talk to the LSA and I get a regular Kerberos token. So that lets me access AD trusting resources. So that's just a benefit. But I'm not AD joined in any way. And I do not require this. I'm just explaining why I have this token. But what we also see is, interesting over here, I have kerberos.microsoftonline.com. And that's the one we care about. And I get that because I set that policy. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill all of these off. So let's just do a purge. And if we do a klist, we can see I don't have any right now. So now all I'm going to do is a net use of my storage account. I'm not going to give it a credential. And I'm connected. If I go to Z, I can see the files. If we go back and now look at our klist, well, yep, once again, as part of the authentication, it went and got a token from my regular on-prem, but I don't need that. Once again, I got that ticket granting ticket from Kerberos.microsoftonline, and because I tried to access the resource, I actually now got a ticket for KIFs, i.e. SMB, for the file share. And it was given to me by Kerberos.microsoftonline.com. So there's no interaction. Yes, I have that AD ticket. I don't need it at all. It's just a side effect because I have line of sight. We can see, hey, yeah, the KDC proxy, login.microsoftonline.com. That's how I got that connection. Completely seamless for me. It just works. And that's really, really cool. So you can see all of those different elements in action. And what's actually really nice about this, the ticket granting ticket that I get based on the primary request when I authenticate is actually pinned to the TPM of the client. So it actually helps secure it. It can't be moved or used anywhere else. So that's kind of the key points. And just to prove, if I look at my DS reg cmd /status, if I type it correctly, don't type too many Ds, what you can see up here is we can see, sure, yeah, I'm Azure AD joined. I am not domain joined. And what we'll also see if we keep looking down, we can see like tenant information. But we can see, yeah, I have an Azure AD primary refresh token. We can see the various top level names. We can see the Azure AD PRT, primary refresh token authority. But that kind of proves that, hey, I'm not AD joined. I'm not doing any of that stuff, but I am part of Azure AD. And it's the Azure AD that makes this work. Now, if you're kind of stuck and you're having problems, one of the things you can do is you can kind of force to go and get the Kerberos ticket granting tickets. So if I did that klist purge again, so I don't have any, if you do a klist git Kerberos ticket granting ticket, it will go out and get the various ticket granting tickets it can get. And you can see, hey, yeah, I've got that key important one from the Azure AD Kerberos realm. And once again, you can ignore the ones from my domain. That's just a benefit Azure AD does if you have line of sight to domain controllers, but it is nothing I actually need at all for this to actually function. It's just kind of a side effect. So that was kind of a demo of what it does. And you saw if the setup is correct, it's actually super, super easy to do. I showed the storage account. So remember what's happening here is the way this is functioning is I authenticate, I'm getting that ticket granting ticket. And then when I want to talk to a service that needs Kerberos and is trusting this realm because it has that identity in here as well. I go to Azure AD and say, hey, I want to speak to SA1. What it then does is it gives me the token that I can give. So it gives me that ticket. So I can think about, hey, here's your SA1 ticket that I can give, and it signs that with that Kerberos key that only they know. So it knows, hey, the client's giving it to me. It's signed with saying only we know, encrypted. Oh yeah, it's legitimate. I will trust and use this. That's a key tenet. And this is nothing special about Azure AD. That's just how Kerberos works. But that's why you need the service you're talking to have a representation in the identity provider, in the STS. So storage account, it's an app registration. Other services may vary. Hey, some might use the managed identity. If it's a compute service, it can leverage that. So the details will vary. Today, again, it's a set amount of services that can use this. It's fairly limited. This is the initial private preview of this. Some are in private preview. Again, the storage account just works. But again, today it's only public preview officially for Azure Virtual Desktops and FS Logics. But as you saw, it does work just for regular Azure Files. But expect it to grow. Cannot bring my own apps today. Down the path, I'm sure that will be an option. So that's it. This is the native Kerberos using Azure AD. I think it's fantastic. It's certainly going to start helping with a lot of scenarios. If you want to start playing with it, it's just available. Again, there's no config on your tenant. You just need to have a policy on the client. Make sure you're running a supported client and a service that works as part of the preview. Until next time, take care.